The afternoon had the kind of light that seemed painted, a soft spell of gold and amber that washed over the park, and made even the most ordinary things glow with quiet wonder. The breeze was gentle, carrying with it the scent of buttered popcorn from a vendor cart near the gate, the faint perfume of flowers from beds along the pathway, and the playful strum of a guitar somewhere in the distance. Children's laughter soared from the swings, punctuating the air with bursts of joy, yet beneath all that brightness lingered a hush of loneliness, as though the world itself were waiting for something unspoken. Jana sat alone on a worn wooden bench, her posture curved in on itself as if she were trying to hide from the warmth around her. In her lap rested a paperback she hadn't turned a page of in nearly an hour. Her eyes had been caught on the slow drift of clouds above, eyes too heavy from days of grief and nights without sleep. She felt like a ghost moving among the living present, but untethered, the ache of recent loss pressing down on her shoulders like invisible chains. It was then she felt a tug at the edge of her sleeve. She blinked down, startled, and saw a child standing beside her. Blonde curls shimmered in the afternoon sun like spun silk, framing a face so delicate it seemed carved from innocence itself. The girl's green eyes bright, searching. Far older than 6 years, had any right to be held Jana in place. "My daddy is so lonely," the little girl said, her voice high and trembling with sincerity. "Can you be my mommy at his birthday party?" The words fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples through Jeanette's chest. For a moment she could only stare, breath suspended, her heart stumbling against the suddenness of it. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Around them, the park seemed to pause. A man stopped mid-step with his dog's leash in hand. A mother pushing a stroller glanced over, eyebrows lifted. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, tugging the branches more softly as if it too awaited Jeanette's answer. The girl did not shrink back from the silence. She simply reached forward, slipping small arms around Jeanette's waist in a hug that was fierce in its simplicity. Jeanette's book tumbled to the ground, forgotten. Something inside her, something long frozen, cracked open. She lowered her hand to the child's back, uncertain, trembling. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her throat dry. "What's your name?" "Michelle," the girl said, muffled against Jeanette's blouse. Michelle, the name fitted her perfectly, delicate yet strong. Jeanette drew in a slow breath, trying to steady herself. She knew nothing about this child, nothing about her father, and yet the plea had pierced straight into the marrow of her grief. For months, Jeanette had carried her own loss like a shadow no one else could see. And now, in the innocent courage of this little girl, the shadow shifted. Nearby, a group of teenagers whispered. A jogger slowed to a walk, curiosity playing on his face. The world had taken notice. Jana felt the weight of those eyes, but more than that, she felt the weight of Michelle's need, pressed into her with that fragile embrace. Jana knelt to meet her at eye level, brushing a stray curl from the girl's cheek. "Why me?" she asked softly, the question breaking from her lips before she could stop it. Michelle looked at her with an honesty that disarmed, her green eyes brimming with a wisdom born not of years, but of longing. "Because you look sad too," she said simply, and in that moment, beneath the golden light and the suspended hush of the park, Jeanette realized fate had not brought her to this bench to be alone. She had been waiting for something, perhaps for someone, and now, impossibly, it had arrived in the shape of a little girl's plea. The air seemed to tremble with possibility, and Jeanette, heart hammering, could not yet know how deeply this small encounter would change everything. Asterisk, the Gendron mansion stood like a citadel of glass and stone on the city's northern ridge, its towering windows catching the last flare of daylight, as though to remind the world of the power housed within. The driveway, a serpent of polished black marble, wound its way to a pair of iron gates carved with the Gendron family crest, an eagle clutching a lightning bolt. For strangers, it was a fortress. For those within, it was something colder, a place where silence reigned more than laughter. Inside, the air was chilled, not by draft or winter, but by an absence of life. The marble floors stretched across vast hallways that echoed with the tick of an antique grandfather clock and the soft hum of hidden air ducts. Chandeliers glittered above like frozen constellations, throwing sterile brilliance across rooms filled with art and antiques. It was a home designed to impress, not to comfort, and in its emptiness the truth clung like a shadow. This was not a house of warmth but of wealth. Michelle sat cross-legged in the center of the living room, a Persian rug sprawling beneath her like a sea of crimson and gold. Her dolls were gathered in a perfect circle, their glassy eyes turned toward her in mute obedience. She smoothed the frilled dress of her favorite doll, Emma, and whispered, "Daddy will be home soon. Maybe he'll play with us this time." The words trembled with hope, but her hands fidgeted as if she already knew the lie tucked inside them. On the far wall, a portrait of Thomas Jennings glared down, painted at the height of his empire's ascent. He stood in a charcoal suit, jaw set, gaze forward, a conqueror surveying his domain. Yet the real Thomas, seated 40 stories above the city in a glass tower, looked nothing like the portrait anymore. His suit sagged with exhaustion, his eyes were ringed with sleepless nights, and his victories tasted hollow. He had built Genin technologies from nothing but ambition and grit, but the price had been exacted at home. He was a father in name, an empire in flesh, and a ghost in his own daughter's world. The stillness broke with the click of heels on marble. Mrs. Henderson, the newest in a long parade of nannies, entered the room balancing a tray with a glass of milk and neatly cut apple slices. Her hair, once tidy, was already disheveled. Her face pinched with weariness. "Michelle, dear," she called with forced brightness. "It's time for your snack." "I'm not hungry," Michelle replied, eyes fixed on Emma. "When is Daddy coming home?" "You know your father works very hard," Mrs. Henderson said, setting the tray down with more force than necessary. Her voice strained against exasperation. "He gives you all of this." She gestured around the cavernous room shelves of untouched toys. Gilded frames, gleaming furniture no child was allowed to touch. Michelle's green eyes, mirrors of her father's, shone with unshed tears. "I don't want things. I want him." Her voice cracked, small but fierce, cutting through the mansion's cold air with a truth even marble walls couldn't swallow. Mrs. Henderson's face tightened. She had heard this before, countless times. Each nanny had. It was why they never stayed long. The child's loneliness was not something to be soothed with rules or bribed away with trinkets. It was raw, relentless, and heavier than most could bear. And tonight, though Michelle didn't know it, her father would not arrive until long after she had been tucked into bed. His empire was unraveling at the edges, rumors of betrayal within his board, stock volatility, enemies circling like vultures. He would sit in his tower with contracts and confidence, never knowing that in the mansion his daughter whispered her heart to dolls. But fate, patient and merciless, was already moving its pieces. Somewhere in the city, Jana folded her grief into a fragile box and replayed the hug of a little girl she had just met. And Thomas, miles away, would soon be forced to confront what he had sacrificed for his throne. The marble floors would not remain empty for long. The hollowness of the Gendron mansion was about to be breached not by servants or board members, but by a woman who carried a sorrow deep enough to echo Michelle's own. And when those two shadows touched, the house would no longer be a fortress, but a stage for the collision of grief, power, and longing. "For now," Michelle whispered into Emma's cloth ear. "She hugged me today. Maybe she'll come back. Maybe she'll be my mommy." Her words carried no farther than the rug, but if walls could speak, they would have shivered. The apartment smelled faintly of rain-soaked concrete and wilted lilies. Jana hadn't bothered to throw away the flowers that had arrived weeks ago, a pity bouquet from neighbors after her latest misfortune. They sat in a vase on the counter, stems slimy, petals curling inward like fists. The place itself was small, neat enough, but haunted. The walls were painted a pale cream that should have felt warm, yet they seemed to echo the emptiness Jana carried inside. She sat at the narrow kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug that had long since lost its heat. The memory of the park still pulsed through her. Michelle's arms around her waist, the plea, the way the world had still. That hug had been more than a child's desperate gesture. It had been an intrusion, a spark lighting a darkened room Jana had vowed never to open again. Her grief was layered, complex. Once, she had loved a man with all the devotion her heart could give. Together, they had dreamed of a future filled with laughter and children. That future had crumbled, shattered by betrayal, then sealed by loss so deep Jana could barely speak of it. She had miscarried their child, and in the wake of that silence, he had left. The emptiness that followed had become her prison. And yet today, a stranger's daughter had wrapped her arms around her and said, "Can you be my mommy?" It was madness to even think about it. Dangerous, too. But in Michelle's eyes, Jana had seen herself a reflection of loneliness so raw it stripped away defenses. Her gaze drifted to the drawer near the sink, the one she hadn't opened in months. She rose, hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, tied with frayed ribbon. Letters she had never thrown away, though she had sworn she would. With trembling hands, she untied the ribbon and pulled one free. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, firm, elegant. with a confidence that once drew her like a moth to flame. Thomas Jendon. Her breath caught. It had been years since she'd seen his name written like that. Years since their paths had crossed in ways too complicated, too shameful to recount. He had been younger then, not yet a titan of industry, but already ambitious. Already dangerous to love. Their entanglement had been brief, but consuming, and it had ended in fire. He had walked away to chase power, and she had been left with ashes. Now his daughter had found her in a park, by accident or by fate. Jana sank into a chair, letter clutched in hand, pulse hammering. She thought of Michelle's plea, of those green eyes so like his. A chill traced her spine. Could it be coincidence? Or was destiny forcing her into the orbit of the man she had spent years trying to forget? Thunder cracked outside, sudden and sharp, though no storm had been forecast. She flinched, staring out the window at the city's jagged skyline. The lights of Jendon Technologies gleamed there like a crown atop the world, as she felt its pull as though invisible threads bound her to it. On the table, the letter lay open, words blurring through her tears. Promises long broken, dreams long dead, and beneath it all a reminder. She had once belonged to that world, and it had nearly destroyed her. A knock at her door jolted her. Slow, deliberate, not the neighbor, not the landlord. Something heavier. Her heart raced. She wiped her eyes, stood, and edged toward the door. The knock came again, firmer this time, rattling the frame. She placed her hand on the handle, hesitating. Whoever it was, their presence vibrated through the threshold like an omen dot, and in that moment, Jana knew her solitude was ending. Whether she wanted it or not, her life was no longer her own. The past was coming back, and it had Thomas Jendon's name carved into it. Asterisk. The Jendon Technologies tower loomed like a blade of glass above the city, cutting into the clouds with merciless precision. By day, it glittered as a monument to ambition. By night, it glowed like a lighthouse for greed. Inside, corridors stretched with antiseptic polish. Assistants glided silently like shadows, and the pulse of power beat in every boardroom. Thomas Jendon sat in his office, a sprawling expanse of steel and glass perched 40 stories above the restless streets. The skyline sprawled before him, yet he barely noticed it. His gaze was locked on the screen, numbers cascading in red losses, dips, rumors of a hostile takeover. Behind him, shelves groaned with awards and plaques, reminders of battles won, empires conquered. Yet tonight, all he felt was a hollow ache of fatigue. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Jendon, she's here." He frowned, rubbing at his temple. Who? The woman from the park. The one Michelle's been asking for. Thomas stiffened, his jaw tightening. Michelle had spoken of her, even refused to sleep, without whispering about the lady who hugged me. He had dismissed it at first, assuming it was one of Michelle's games. But the persistence in her daughter's voice had worn at him. Now, this stranger was standing at his door. "Send her in," he said, though his voice was colder than he felt. The door opened, and Jana stepped inside. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. The years fell away and yet pressed heavily between them, a history neither could erase. Jeanette's hair caught the light in a soft cascade. Her eyes ringed with sleepless nights, her posture both wary and unyielding. Thomas felt the old recognition hit him like a blow, memories of another time, another life when she had once mattered more than he had dared admit. Jana, the name escaped his lips. Rough with disbelief, her expression hardened. "So you do remember." He stood, the leather chair groaning as it rolled back. The weight of his tailored suit felt suddenly suffocating, his armor cracking. "What are you doing here? With Michelle?" "I didn't seek her out," Jana said, voice steady but trembling underneath. "She found me, in the park. She asked me to be her mother." The words hung between them like a live wire. Thomas turned away, pacing toward the window, hands gripping the sill as if the city itself could steady him. "She doesn't understand what she's asking. She understands more than you think," Jana shot back. "That little girl is starving not for toys or money, but for you. For affection. She's begging strangers in the park because her own father is never home." The truth landed with precision, sharper than any business rival's strike. Thomas clenched his jaw, his reflection in the glass fractured by city lights. "And you?" he asked after a long silence, his voice low, dangerous. "What are you doing here, Jana? After all these years, after everything?" Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "I didn't plan this. I didn't want this. But Michelle, she broke something open in me, something I thought I buried." She hesitated, her throat thickening. "And seeing you again, It feels like a curse. The tension coiled tighter, the room shrinking around them. The skyscraper walls, the awards, the titles, none of it mattered here. Only the people who had once shared a fire now stood on the edge of rekindling it, or burning alive in its memory. Thomas turned to face her, his mask cracking, vulnerability flashing through his weary eyes. If you think you can walk into my daughter's life, into my life, after everything, and not bring chaos with you. He trailed off, unable to finish. Jonna met his gaze, unflinching. Chaos is already here, Thomas. It's been here for years. You've just been too busy hiding behind your empire to notice. The intercom buzzed again, breaking the spell. Mr. Jendon, the board is waiting. The shareholders are demanding answers. Thomas's eyes stayed locked on Jeanette's. A storm raging in the silence between them. For the first time in years, business was not the most dangerous battlefield he faced. Because Jonna was back, and with her return came secrets, scars, and a past that could destroy them both. Asterisk night draped itself over the Gendron estate like a heavy velvet curtain. The city lights glittered far below the ridge, but here, high in the mansion's hills, the silence was almost oppressive. The grounds were immaculate lawns trimmed with geometric precision, hedges sculpted like soldiers at attention, fountains whispering in the dark. Yet despite the elegance, the house felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum, beautiful, vast, but haunted by absence. Jonna followed Michelle's small footsteps through the grand foyer. The child's curls bounced in the glow of the chandelier, her little hands clutching Jonna's fingers as though afraid she might disappear. This way, Michelle whispered, tugging her toward the great hall lined with portraits of Gendron's past. Oil-painted eyes stared down, their gazes too sharp, their faces too grim. Men in black suits, women in gowns stiff with age, each one wearing the same air of power and attachment. Asterisk Jeanette's heels clicked against the marble as they passed, the sound echoing. Her heart thudded, though she tried to steady herself. She had been here before years ago, when her world had brushed against Thomas's for a brief, burning moment. Then, the house had felt intimidating but magnificent. Tonight, it felt alive, as if every polished surface concealed a secret waiting to crawl free. Michelle pulled her into the living room, the same cavernous chamber with its Persian rug and grand piano gleaming in a corner. Her dolls were arranged in their usual circle, waiting. "They've been waiting for you," Michelle said, matter of fact, as though it were perfectly natural that dolls could sense a presence. She sat cross-legged, tugging Jonna down beside her. Jonna smiled faintly, brushing the curl from the girl's face. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Daddy doesn't like wasting time," Michelle replied sullenly, arranging her dolls. Then, in a whisper, she added, "But he wastes time anyway. All of it at work." Asterisk the words cut Jonna in a way she hadn't expected. She smoothed the child's hair, her chest tightening with an ache she recognized all too well. A noise interrupted them, a faint scrape, like metal against wood. Jeanette's head snapped up. Across the room, near the hallway that led deeper into the mansion, a door stood ajar. She remembered that door, Thomas's study. It had always been locked when she had visited before. "Michelle," Jonna said softly, "does your daddy let you go in there?" Michelle shook her head quickly. "No, that's the room with the shadows. Mrs. Henderson says we mustn't go near it." The girl's tone was so serious, so rehearsed, that Jonna felt a shiver crawl up her spine. She glanced toward the study again. The air seemed colder in that direction, the light from the chandelier struggling to reach the gap in the door. Astor's footsteps echoed suddenly from the hallway beyond. Heavy, deliberate, Jonna stiffened, pulling Michelle closer. A tall figure appeared in the doorway. Thomas. His tie hung loose, his shoulders rigid from a day of war in the boardroom. His gaze landed first on Michelle, then on Jonna, and lingered there, unreadable. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was low, but it carried the weight of command. Michelle sprang up, clutching Emma the doll. "I was showing her my circle. She likes it here." Thomas's jaw flexed. His eyes flicked toward the study, the door still cracked open, before snapping back to Jonna. "Stay out of that room," he said curtly, as though he'd caught her trespassing. "It's not for children, or strangers." Jonna met his gaze evenly, her pulse quickening. "You don't have to remind me. I remember the rules." Something passed between them, an old wound, an old secret. His eyes darkened, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned to Michelle, softening only slightly. "It's late. Upstairs, now." The girl obeyed reluctantly, padding toward the grand staircase, her doll pressed to her chest. Jana watched her disappear up the steps, the house swallowing her small figure in silence. When they were alone, Thomas crossed the room, closing the study door with a quiet but deliberate click. The sound was final, like a lock turning. "Whatever you think you heard," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Forget it." Jeanette's throat tightened. "You don't have to protect me from shadows, Thomas. I know you. I know this house." His jaw clenched, but for a fleeting moment, vulnerability flickered in his expression. Fear, even. He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it brushed her skin like a warning. "No, Jeanette, you don't know. There are things here that even you couldn't imagine." The chandelier light trembled slightly, as if stirred by a draft that wasn't there. And for the first time since stepping into the mansion, Jana felt not just grief or unease but danger. The Gendron ballroom glittered as though it had been carved from starlight. Chandeliers dripped with crystals that refracted every flicker of flame, casting 1,000 fractured halos across marble floors. The walls soared upward, dressed in velvet drapes the color of midnight wine, while golden candelabras stood like sentinels at every corner. Waiters in white gloves glided silently among the guests, silver trays balanced with champagne flutes. It was less a child's birthday party and more a coronation. Business tycoons, political figures, socialites, and shareholders filled the room, each smile a sharp, each handshake a heavy with calculation. A birthday for 6-year-old Michelle was a display of power. For her father, the chance to show the empire that Thomas Gendron had not faltered, not even as rumors of instability gnawed at the edges of his company. Tonight, appearances mattered more than ever. At the center of it all stood Michelle in a pink satin dress, curls shining like a halo under the chandelier light. She looked the part of a princess, but her eyes, those too old, too wise green eyes, swept the crowd with a longing that had nothing to do with tiaras or gifts. Beside her, Thomas carried himself with the practiced ease of a king among courtiers. His suit was perfect, his posture unyielding, but up close the shadows under his eyes betrayed the war he fought behind the boardroom doors. He smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. And then there was Jana. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, half hidden behind a pillar, uncertain if she belonged. The dress she wore was simple compared to the sequin gowns of the other women, but somehow, that simplicity made her stand out more. Her presence was not a statement of wealth, but of truth. And truth in this room was as rare as innocence. Guests glanced at her curiously, whispers trailing in her wake. Michelle spotted her and lit up, her little shoes tapping against marble as she hurried forward. "You came," she cried, throwing her arms around Jeanette's waist. "I knew you would." The heads of nearby guests turned. Conversations hushed. Jana stiffened as Michelle's voice carried through the room like a bell. She knelt quickly, whispering, "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I?" Thomas's gaze found them, sharp and unreadable. For a moment, the mask of CEO cracked and something raw flickered through. He started forward, but Michelle beat him to it. She spun back toward the crowd, tugging Jana by the hand, her voice clear and guileless as she announced, "This is her. This is the mommy I told you about." The ballroom froze. Champagne glasses halted midair. Whispered deals died in throats. All eyes turned to Thomas Gendron the Titan, the empire builder, as his daughter presented a stranger as her chosen mother. A murmur rippled like an earthquake through the crowd. The shareholders, who had come to measure their king, now saw the cracks in his throne. Cameras flashed, too fast for Thomas to stop them. "Michelle," Thomas said, his voice low, but it carried the force of steel wrapped in velvet. He reached for his daughter, but she clung to Jana, pressing herself against her side. "She makes me happy," Michelle said simply, her little voice ringing louder than the chandeliers above. "Daddy, she can be my mommy, right?" The room collectively inhaled. For once, the empire was not watching Thomas's stock value, they were watching his heart. Jeanette's chest tightened, her pulse thundering. She wanted to speak, to calm the storm, but her throat locked. Thomas's eyes met hers across the distance, and in them she saw everything he would never say aloud: fury, fear, guilt, longing. And then something else. From the corner of the room, near the locked double doors that led to the east wing, came a sound, a low groan, like wood under strain. The chandelier crystals trembled faintly, though no wind stirred. Jeanette's eyes flicked toward the sound, and her blood ran cold. The east wing, the one Michelle had called the place with shadows. Guests didn't notice, too enthralled by the spectacle of Thomas Gendron's humiliation. But Jeanette noticed. She felt the shift in the air. the pulse of something dark and unseen pressing against the edges of the celebration. Thomas noticed too. His gaze darted toward the east wing doors for the briefest second before snapping back to Jeanne. The look was unmistakable, a warning, a plea, a command. Don't go there. But Michelle clutched Jeanette's hand tighter, her small fingers trembling. Don't let go, she whispered, her voice suddenly thin with fear. Jeanne pulled her closer, her heart pounding. In the glitter of the chandeliers and the roar of whispers, she understood this party was not just a stage for wealth and image. It was a mask, and behind the mask, the mansion was beginning to stir with its secrets. Asterisk, the birthday candles hadn't even been lit, and yet already, shadows were creeping in. Asterisk, the ballroom was still humming with whispers long after the cake had been wheeled away. Guests lingered, pretending to toast champagne, but truly stealing glances at Thomas Gendon, gauging how the Titan would recover from his daughter's public outburst. A few executives chuckled into their glasses, sensing weakness. Rivals sharpened invisible knives, but Thomas's attention wasn't on them. His eyes followed Michelle, who clung to Jeanette's hand as if the woman were a lifeline in a storm. The sight pierced him in ways no boardroom ambush ever had. He could fight hostile takeovers, manipulate stock prices, bend politicians with a single phone call, but he could not command his daughter's heart. When the last of the guests drifted toward their cars and limousines, the house grew eerily quiet. The chandeliers still glittered above, but their brilliance felt hollow, mocking. Thomas dismissed the staff with a sharp flick of his hand. Jeanne, reluctant, guided Michelle toward the stairs. Stay with her, Michelle begged, eyes wide and shimmering. Don't leave me tonight. Jeanne smoothed the curls back from her forehead. I'll be nearby, sweetheart. The girl nodded but didn't look convinced. She disappeared up the grand staircase, her small form swallowed by shadows. Silence pressed down. Jeanne turned, expecting Thomas to lash out, to wield his authority like a sword. Instead, he stood by the east wing doors, one hand resting on the brass handle, his face carved in stone. You shouldn't have come, he said finally, voice low. I didn't come for you, Jeanne replied. Her tone was even, but her pulse thundered. She found me. She needed me. Michelle doesn't understand what she needs, he said. But there was no conviction in it. His gaze flicked to the door behind him, then back to Jeanne. And you've always been dangerous when she's involved. Jeanette's breath caught. What do you mean? He hesitated, his knuckles whitened on the brass handle. Because you remind me of things I've tried to bury, the words echoed in the cavernous hall. But before she could answer, a sound rumbled from behind the east wing doors, low, resonant, like something shifting in the dark. Jeanne froze. What is that? Thomas's face tightened. Nothing you need to know, but the sound came again, this time sharper. A thud like a chair overturning, followed by what could only be a muffled cry. Jeanette's blood turned cold. Thomas, she whispered, stepping closer. Someone's in there. His jaw clenched. For a moment, the carefully built armor cracked, and raw fear flashed in his eyes. Don't, he warned. Don't open it. But Jeanette's instincts, sharpened by grief and by the ache she saw in Michelle's eyes, propelled her forward. She pressed her palm to the door. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, as if whatever lay beyond had drained the warmth from the very air. Tell me what you're hiding, she demanded, before Thomas could stop her. The door groaned and swung inward on its own. The stench hit first damp, metallic, tainted with decay. The room beyond was dim, lit only by a single swaying bulb, and in that half-light, Jeanette's world tilted there, bound to a chair in the center of the room, was a woman. Her wrists raw from rope, her hair matted, her eyes wild with fury and exhaustion. She was pale, gaunt, but unmistakable. Michelle's mother. Alive. Jeanne staggered backward, her hand flying to her mouth. No, she whispered. She's supposed to be dead. The woman's voice was hoarse, but it carried venom. Her eyes locked on Thomas, blazing with hate. That's what he wanted you to believe. Thomas surged forward, slamming the door shut with a force that rattled the chandeliers in the hall. He turned on Jeanne, his face ashen, his mask shattered. You don't understand, he said, voice breaking for the first time. It's not what it looks like, but it was. And it wasn't. Jeanette's heart raced as pieces crashed together. Michelle's haunted loneliness, Thomas's endless work, the forbidden study, the shadows in the house. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had hidden her. Why? Jeanette's voice cracked with horror and fury. Why would you? Thomas stepped closer, desperate now, every inch of his power stripped away, because she's not the woman you think she is. Because if you knew what she'd done, what she was planning, you'd never forgive me for keeping her alive. The words hung like knives, dripping with menace and mystery. Behind the door, the woman screamed, a sound that cut through the mansion like glass, and upstairs. Michelle's small voice called down the stairs, trembling with fear, "Daddy, Mommy, what's happening?" The chandelier flickered once, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The golden world of wealth and control had finally shattered, leaving only shadows, secrets, and a child's plea caught between a woman and a man who had built his empire on lies.